All right, well, we'll get started and we'll let the stragglers catch up. This will obviously be recorded and we'll have notes and whatnot to share with all the attendees for after. So if for folks that may miss the beginning of it, they'll be able to catch up in their own time. Welcome to today's Navigating App Development webinar. I think we have some interesting set of panelists here that share some deep knowledge on this topic, and we'll get into it and have a fun conversation here. Our focus is, looking at early stage companies and all of the resource constraints that those companies face, and we're going to have some real world knowledge shared about how to get things done in that manner. A little bit about your host for today. So Logic Boost Labs. My name is Chris. I'm the president and CTO of Logic Boost Labs. We're a startup accelerator. We focus on B2B SaaS. We invest in early stage, pre-seed, up to series investment. And so we look at this is part of our portfolio evaluation. We look at folks that have different stages in the life cycle with respect to everything from MVP to much more mature applications. So we see a broad spectrum of this, and I think our panelists are going to reflect some of these experiences as well. So if anyone out there is in the B2B SaaS space, they're looking for a partner, an investor, someone that can help them along this path, please feel free to get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. Like I said, I'll introduce myself and go around the panelists here. I've been a software engineer for the better part of 30 years, survivor of many, many startups. Along the way, lots of thrills and spills. In fact, one of our other panelists here, Matt, the two of us have some shared background. We're both at Yahoo for a number of years, so did the big company thing for a bit. And now I have the privilege of having the best job in the world, which is helping early stage startups get off their feet and get going. Neil, let's go to you for an introduction.
Yeah, sure thing. And thanks again for having me. I'm excited to be here. My background, I am a software developer. My background is similar to you. I think I spent a lot of time kind of in and out of different startups. I like the way you said survivor. I think I'll steal that. I'm a survivor of multiple venture-backed startups. I was part of a company called EverFi, which is now an ed tech unicorn here in DC, but I was there at the very beginning to help kind of build and scale their product teams and engineering teams. And I got to see kind of that company grow all the way from their seed stage through their Series C. And then I started a company after that called Aspire, which is a HR technology company, which we went through our Series B and sold in 2018 to Markham, this large accounting firm. After that, I also feel like I have one of the best jobs in the world. Our agency's job is to help Series A and Series B tech founders build their kind of like first or second professional dev team. And so transitioning usually from, like a nearshore development team or a college buddy who built the first version of their app, or maybe their first kind of like early stage engineering team, into a more robust kind of venture scale CTO, development shop, development team, and all the stuff that goes along with that. We do take a mix of cash and equity for our services, and so it is one part venture studio and then one part development agency. But for the last 8 years, we've worked with hundreds of startups at this point to get them off the ground and kind of build a robust tech infrastructure behind them.
Cool. Thank you for being here. Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself and UpTech.
Sure. My name is Matt New. I'm one of the partners here at UpTech Studio. We're located here in Orange County. Like Chris mentioned a long time ago, he and I worked together at Yahoo. And then from coming out of Yahoo, decided to jump kind of the startup space. Met a group of folks along the way. The last startup we were all at together was Acorns. I was the VP of product at Acorns. And decided we were going to start our own company where we get to work with startups. And so we kind of engage with startups in a number of different ways. We usually try, kind of similar to Neil, trying to figure out, where the founder is in their journey and what kind of engagement makes sense for them. If they're earlier on, we may kind of recommend kind of a smaller project. If they're kind of later stage, we may do something a little bit bigger. With me is Ryan Hedges. He's on the team as someone who's actually looking specifically for today's topic. Looking at, for those people who are early, what are some great technologies that they could potentially use? You know, is it something that you want to build in Flutterflow? Do you want to build, you need to use your backend in Zapier? Ryan's a great resource for understanding those things.
Glad to be here.
That's great. Well, we're looking forward to it as well. Talking with everyone. So for folks here, please, we would love you to jump into the Q&A tab and fire your questions in there. We will try to address all those as we go through this, or if nothing else at the end. And like stated before, we'll share, we'll have some links here at the end as well to share get in touch with everyone here. Matt, why don't you pull the audience for us here?
Sure. So one of the things that we do here at Uptick Studio, like kind of as I mentioned in the intro, when we talk to founders, is we try to figure out, you know, where are you in kind of your journey? Are you still at that idea phase? You know, are you still like, I've got this idea, I feel compelled, I've got to go do this thing, I've got to go do this thing. And the first thing that we try and do for people who are in this phase is help them understand, is it an idea or is there actually a business behind it? You know, is it something people are willing to pay for? Are other people already doing this idea? This is where, you know, and usually the outcome for us at this phase is a solid pitch deck that you have presented, you know, to one of our investor partners to get feedback on. Because doing that pitch deck really forces you to sharpen the pencil and do your work and really think about like, well, yeah, how am I going to make money at this, right? Like, how would I actually kind of turn this into a business? We like to say that everybody, you know, when you say the word MVP, everybody loves the word minimal, but they always tend to neglect the word viable. And for it to be viable means it actually makes money. It's something that you can, you know, is going to, at least there's a path there for that to become an actual business. So the next phase that we kind of try and see where people are at is, are you in a validate phase? You know, it's like, yeah, we see what you're doing. We think there's a business there. Before you go off and spend a bunch of money building, let's try and validate that for you. So, and this is where some of the solutions that Ryan's using around Flutterflow, low code, no code, these tools to help people, let me get an app. What we like to say is, can you get in front of 30 people that you don't know? So how do we build something that we can get in front of people, get feedback on, get real usage on before you go off and spend your entire budget building and blowing something out? And if you're at that stage where you've kind of done that, you know you're onto something, you know you've felt really great confidence that you've found, you know, at least an inkling of product market fit. That's where we move into this develop phase. Where, you know, and it's really, we just want to maximize your investment. We also want to maximize the investment that your investors have put into this. You validated it, it's time to start building. We often will, you know, we use Flutter a lot here because what we want to do is be really respectful of the money you raised. And Flutter is a great way to do that. You can build it all in a single code base. You can publish it to web, to Android, to iOS, to desktop. There's a lot of kind of options that you could do there. And then the last phase we've got up here is really people who are kind of in a refine phase. So, and there's a number of ways that you could be in the refine phase. You may have kind of gone through this and jumped ahead and maybe hired, you know, a team. Maybe you've gone offshore and had a team build you something, and you may not know what it is you've got. You know, we built this thing. Is it ready to get launched? Can you help us kind of figure out like what I've built? Sometimes we'll come in and do an assessment for those people and understand like what it is that they have and if they're really ready to kind of scale it. Or it's some, you know, maybe you built it and I've been there, you know, you built the wrong thing. It's time for you to kind of look back and be like, what were our customer journeys again? What was our personas? Did we really build something that was servicing them? Or do we kind of need to go back and reconfigure things? I think should be a poll that I think I triggered. I think what we'd love for you to do is for you to kind of self-select, like, which of these phases are you in? And then kind of get to the Q&A. But knowing which phase you're in, it's kind of a different answer for each phase. Because again, we really want to be respectful of like, which money you've raised, like, is it just you, you know, or do you have a team? Like it kind of helps us kind of be better about how we ask those questions and have that discussion with you.
Yeah, please jump into the poll, and that'll help us steer where we go with the conversation, because this should be interactive in that way, help get you the answers you're looking for and the information you need. Neil, let's maybe we get to the, you know, kind of interesting, salacious part of this, which is
Salacious, I like that word.
yes, you know, the mistakes, the thrills, the spills, the pitfalls, right? So Matt described to us kind of a thoughtful, reasoned, rational approach to stepping through from idea, vision to execution and deployment. And most of us have not been lucky enough to have had that sort of clarity or the resources to be able to execute in that way. And I think it would be informative if folks to get some either anecdotal or otherwise, some of where this goes wrong, and maybe
Yeah,
some
for sure.
corrective things you've seen along the way that you've helped folks with.
Yeah, I mean, I really like Matt. I really love the way you frame that journey of startups, and sort of like at each step of the way, there's sort of multiple needs and also multiple sort of like, there's like a right path forward that differs from the other paths or the other stages. For me, like I think one of the things, Chris, you said this earlier, but the people who are on this call are both kind of software minded, engineering minded folks, but also many of us are investors, or many of us have kind of been through the early stage startup journey ourselves. And one of the things that I think the entrepreneurship sector kind of does as a disservice is we kind of treat entrepreneurship as a very defined and codified process, like my sort of favorite thing to pick on is the 10-slide pitch deck. Like if you go to any incubator, any accelerator around the world, they sort of coach their entrepreneurs. All of them have creative and unique and different ideas, and they sort of coach them to kind of deviate towards the mean and make like a problem, a solution, a finances slide that goes like this, a competitive matrix, all that stuff. And it sort of like reduces our startup stories into kind of like this very kind of like stale sort of like thing, right? But the truth is, all of our startups are really trying to do, Matt, what you said earlier, right? Which is sort of like prove something, very unique and very special true, right? And another way of saying that is like every stage of the startup is an experiment. And that experiment, sure, part of it is building tech and sort of seeing if you're able to build tech or validate a customer market or whatever. But fundamentally, you're trying to prove that a business works. And so my favorite way of thinking of all of these stages, or just of any stage of your company, is kind of saying, in order for my business to get to the next stage, what must be true for that to happen? And like, I know that these 10 things must be true. I must have a customer who's paying. I must have an app that works. I must have these features running. I must be able to replicate that in separate markets, whatever those 10 things are for you, right? And say, I know that these 5 things are true, but I don't know that these 5 things are true. And I'm sort of systematically experimenting to figure these things out as true or false. Yeah. That style of thinking, I think sometimes we lose that. And I think product development is a little bit addictive, right? And it's one of those things that it's really easy to get lost in. We get so into the idea of building features and getting to the next release that we sort of lose the, what's the phrase? The forest for the trees for the forest. Something gets lost, where we kind of look at it and we say, we're trying to build this app. We're not necessarily trying to build this business, right? But at the end of the day, right, like there are so many ways to go about building a business. And those are so different than I think just trying to get an app off the ground. So I think the biggest, and this happens, I mean, unfortunately, I think with like 50 to 75% of the tech builds that we see, is that the tech becomes a goal in and of itself. And that becomes a goal sort of like separate from the rest of the business. And I think that idea of taking a step back, reevaluating, say, what were the original customer stories or hypotheses that got us here, I think is a really good exercise for startups to go through.
Maybe you could riff on for a moment the proportionality of tech, specific ones and zeros as it relates to this overall scheme of I want to build an app, right? Like, at least my take on it is, in some ways, the code is the least important part of this whole equation, right? You share some thoughts on that, if you would.
For me or for Matt?
Neil, you have the mic. Go for it.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think coding is the easy part of coding, is what I always say. It's like sitting down and writing the code is the easiest part of it. The sort of superstructures of thought that surround the code that you write, the human problems that you're trying to solve, those tend to be the hardest ones. And so, I think that there's so many technological ways to get to a path, but like at the end of the day, you're proving something true or false. And so I really love that exercise, is to say, hey, as a startup, let me fast forward 1 year, right? What must be true for my business to work? And then if these things are not true, right, like I have failed at the startup, right? Or I figured out that this isn't true or not. That sort of framework of thinking, I think, is the most important thing. But then as you work your way down, that is, I think, what becomes the basis of a roadmap. And that roadmap becomes the basis of a set of kind of like, features or sprints that a tech team is trying to build. And that's sort of what leads to the coding process. I think that my opinion is I am a developer. I love coding. We were talking earlier before this call about how like one of the things that's really exciting about a developer journey is that you think about infinite scale, right? That's like part of what software trains you to do is like you don't think about 0, you don't think about 1, you think about infinity. Like if my company can get to infinity scale, what would that look like, right? I think it's cool because at a certain point, that problem is no longer a technological one. It is a human one, right? People have to use it. People have to build it. People have to maintain it and support it. People have to take it out into the market. People have to talk about it, right? The code, even at perfection, is nothing without the people that surround it, right? So I go back to that thing. And I say this as a developer, right? Like I think development is the sort of most, it's the simplest part of the development process.
Yep. Just
Yeah.
to go on, kind of
Yeah.
continue with that, we often see, I think the hard part when you do have a technical founder is there's the tendency to want to code yourself out of the problem. It's like, I don't see traction. Let's build more features. And it may be that you don't need to build more features. One of the things that we see often is a lot of the startups we work with is they may not have instrumented their analytics. They might not even have known like how people are using their product. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about, like being upfront, like what does success look like? Like we coach the PMs on our teams. When you're actually creating your stories, you also have to put in your success metrics. You also have to put in what are the charts you're going to use to verify that this is successful or not. And so not having that, not being able to test it, you won't know like, oh, okay, are people using their product? Are they using it that as I expected? And then we find teams that, they've got their analytics in place, but they're not looking at it consistently. That's another thing that we have to coach people to do is you should be looking at your metrics on a weekly basis and making sure that people are, and look for, are people doing those key events that you expect them to? And so I think that kind of ties back into that. How do you stay on target and not wander too far away from what you kind of set out to build? The other thing that we've seen out there, and this is also a common kind of pitfall or a bit of a trap, is just building great tech for the sake of building tech. We've seen some companies that we've worked with when I'm like, this is amazing technology that's looking for a problem to solve, right? It's like you built this amazing tech, but like, and then you're trying to retroactively fit a customer journey to it. I think it's much easier. It's much easier to develop. It's much easier to give you focus if you do it the other way around. But it's like, what is the problem we are fundamentally trying to solve? And then, Chris, to your point, technology is just a means to do it. It's just what you use to actually be able to solve that, and then you track it and look at, did this implementation work? Are people doing what, are we really solving this problem for them? If not, then it's time to kind of go back and, okay, how do we change it up? What did we learn? What do we need to kind of reconfigure or refactor here?
I guess I'd echo and reinforce what you both have said here, which is one, and this is focused on the early stage company, right? So, scale to the moon. Well, to me, that's a premature optimization. Like that's a problem for future self in many ways, right? And I do think that certainly folks that come from the technical side lean there too early, too often, and it's not really moving the business case forward, right? So I often talk with our portfolio companies, and you may sound a little crass, but like that's your Series A investors problem.
Yeah.
That's what they're funding you for, right?
Yeah.
So,
right.
Go block and tackle the necessities today. And those will be good problems to have for future self. And then I would also echo too, Matt, what you said about kind of metrics and KPIs, which is I've been shocked at how few products have little to no metrics capture. And we talked about how, this validation of, folks are flying blind. They've built the thing and don't really understand what's going on. And if we don't have those KPIs in place, it goes back to the old saying, right? You can't fix what you don't measure. So, we get into kind of a world of hurt there if we're just, flying blind and don't know what's going on. So I definitely would, reinforce both of those. Matt, I wanted to ask you about, from the early stage perspective, how should we think about requirements for these types of products, right? Like early stage companies don't have a PMO, product management office. and often the product manager is the CEO and the co-founder and the janitor and everything all in one, right? So, how should we think about, and, the mechanics of getting the requirements together, and how do we translate that into things that are engineering executable? Is there some short thoughts about that piece of the equation?
Yeah, and we just talked to a company today, and they had no stories. They'd been building tech, and it's hard because unless you've done it, you don't understand that you should be doing that discipline. But it is really important, and you can start with something super lightweight. Use Trello. Like Trello used to be great to actually capture just the work that you're doing. But I think, again, like I said, the reason why that's important, it's more than just task management. It's more than just keeping track. It's also put your thought into it. The downside of being a product person is that it's rare that I get to actually go in there and code it myself. Although sometimes I will put my own analytic events in because I know exactly where I want them. But the good thing about it is if you are that non-technical founder or that product role, what you should do is actually put all of your intent into that particular ticket and keep track of this is how I want it to work, and you can kind of look up the different formats, as a blah, I want blah, so that blah kind of format for user stories. But also I would encourage you to put in there not just that story, but also the idea around how you're going to track if that story was successful. If I could leave this group with one thing, you'll see things about acceptance criteria, and that's really important. You'll see things like steps to test, and that's all good stuff to have inside of those stories. But if you can at least capture the story, but then also how you plan to track if that story is going to be successful or not, so that the engineer knows, okay, well, we've got to make sure we track that, these kind of metrics. At least for early stage, make sure you do that work. And I get we're all really busy and we want to, we're especially that founder role, you're doing a million things, but that's really, really important so that you can document and go back and look. One of the things we try is what do we think is going to happen? If you don't document what you think is going to happen, then when you kind of get to the other side of it, were we successful or not? I think it's really important for teams to be here's the functionality that we want to build, and here's how we think people are going to use it, so that then when you get it released, you can see well, were we right or wrong? And if we were wrong, what do we need to change?
Well, that makes perfect sense. And yeah, this is good information for folks that are resource constrained, and how do you focus on getting the right thing done.
And honestly, that's a place for anybody who's in kind of on the session today. I'd be happy to kind of help you with creating those stories. And if you've got stories, to kind of look at them and coach you on that stuff. I've been writing stories for a really long time now at this point.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Quick interlude here. So folks watching along here, fire your questions into the chat so that we can, we'll take them all on at the end. So go ahead and get those queued up so we can get to those when we go to wrap. I guess, Ryan, since we have you here, and since we poo-pooed the importance of actual technology implementation to this point, but maybe we could get you to weigh in and give the audience some thoughts about, hey, I'm going to go start on this journey and actually build, we've gone through the business case. We know what we want to build. We believe we know what we want to build. We have some requirements around this. Now we have to go pick some technologies. And, maybe you could share some thoughts about starting points that may make sense for people to evaluate and look at, if they either know nothing about the space of possibilities, or, perhaps there's reasoned biases that you have towards specific technology stacks.
Yeah, I think the starting off point for all of this is your business in a place where you're having to actually use technology to validate it or move and prove the business cases you have. We run into this often within the work we're doing, and we've done this, excuse me, in the past. Matt has a fun, famous story about when we were at Acorns. We, instead of building and using technology, we did an email campaign. Yes, email is obviously technology, but that proved to us that there was a value there for us to invest in technology, actually using software developer resources versus just marketing research to prove that idea. So once you kind of get over that hurdle, you're saying, yeah, there's something here, technology is needed. I think you usually end up two places. Either you already have a team you already have developers and they're going to work on the feature and build it that way. And some of you here probably are maybe looking for the opposite, which is, I don't know where to go next. And that usually is looking and saying, well, how far do I go and how refined does this have to be in order to prove that there's value here, that we should continue investing more resources to refine it. So right now, I think we are actually in a wonderful time to be in as entrepreneurs and technologists, because we have technologists who are building technology that builds technology, aka low code and no code tools are coming out. New ones are coming out every day that are trying to address a lot of your technical needs and problems that you're running into as a business. So some of the favorite ones right now that we found a lot of value here at Uptech Studio is Glide. Glide is a very low code, no code tool. And it has a lot of predefined, it's not very customizable, but you can actually build something, have forms, gather data, display things, and actually prove if there's something there. You might not be able to do everything you want, but it's something you could show your friends and family, an investor, an interested party, and get excellent feedback on. Then you start kind of going up the chain, and you start, another favorite tool of ours is Flutter Flow. It dovetails nicely into our traditional software development, which is using Flutter as a technology. And Flutter Flow is, again, a low-code tool, drag and drop things on the screen, build your application, and you can build full-on native applications as needed, web apps, things like that. The other kind of underpinning thing is around data. Data is pretty huge in your business, and we found that Zapier is probably a great tool. There's a couple other ones that are coming out there. I think it's like WRK Work, which allows you to move data between systems. So I found, spinning up a simple website using something like Webflow, and having that interact with Zapier. Zapier can move that data to a spreadsheet that I need to use to track stuff. So you can have these tools that help you build the interfaces and maybe manage and gather data. And you have Zapier as a great tool to like move data around. So happy to dive into some details or like talk about maybe some solutions there if needed. But those are kind of like some quick tools that we use that I think provide a lot of value early on as you're kind of growing your business.
Okay, so the message I'm getting here is basically your early days, you're resource constrained, you think you have your business case put together, but you need to at least get a prototype out there because you don't have the resources to go build, a fully polished world-class product to go prove out your case. And so you've given us a kind of a drive-by of some of the tooling that can help us think about where to chase that, which is great.
We've got some questions, Chris, that
Yes.
actually some of these questions kind of dovetail into what Ryan was talking about in the Q&A that have come in.
Got it. Yeah. So I was going to ask one more question of the panelists here, and then we'll get to Q&A if that works for folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question I want to throw out there is so what's the one mistake you've seen people that go down this path make, and that you want to warn them off, wave them off, don't do this? And what's the summary? What should you have done instead? And Neil, maybe we can start with you and some thoughts you may have there.
Yeah, so I can think of a few. Again, our niche is sort of working with Series A and Series B tech startups to sort of like build the professional infrastructure. So most of our job is like undoing what happens in the stages before that. So let's see, what's my...
So you see a lot of stuff that's kind of like experiments that have escaped the lab or petri dish, right? So they're tangled ball of yarn. They've served their purpose, but our conversation earlier, like the series funding is solving, they're the problem solver for the next round, and you're there to provide that next level of fit and finish.
Yeah, and I really love, Ryan, what you said earlier, I think is great. I think that like oftentimes in the early stages, it's very rare that you're trying to prove that you can build an app. Like of all the things you're trying to prove in your company, no investor is going to be like, well, if I give you $1 million, will you be able to build an app? Like you sort of know that's a solved problem at this point, right? The question is like, what are you building an app for, and how does it hit the market and all that stuff, right? And tech is just fundamentally expensive. Like it's an expensive thing, and it not only is it expensive in and of itself, it's expensive and it begets other expenses that go along with it, right? So like the more you spend on tech, the bigger your backlog gets, the bigger your sort of like engineering team. So like that process, I think, needs to be timed at the right time. And I think the longer you can hold off building custom software, the better you are served. The more you can prove things out systematically and repeating, using no-code frameworks or kind of like putting together tools that don't cost you the cost of a custom software shop or a custom software team, the better you'll be served. And so I think that's a big thing, is kind of like pre-spending or overbuilding on technology prior to the point that you really need it. There is a point where that does make sense, right? And I think that's part of the reason why some of these rounds are so large, right? Is because 40% goes to product, 40% goes to growth, 20% goes to overhead. If you're raising $2 million, a huge chunk goes into product development, right? But I think timing that at the right point in time, I think, is really important.
Got it. Yeah. So you spoke to some of what you mentioned. There's also, again, the sin of premature optimization, right? Like, yeah. Matt, what are your thoughts on that? Like, what's the one thing you'd wave someone off? Don't do this.
I swear one of the things that is definitely the most, and I want to give a talk on this, is falling in love with a particular idea or a particular approach. And that can apply to the founder, it can apply to the product person, it can apply to the engineer. When you start to fall in love with your implementation, and we all do it, right? We think we're so clever. We think we're, oh, look at this great architecture that I've come up with, or look at this clever way I've come to solve this particular problem. But when you start to do that, you start to almost harden and narrow down a path where you start to just pursue that without being able to take in information around, like, actually the path you're on is completely wrong. No one knows how to use your product. What you've built, like, you get it, but nobody else understands it. And I think that's also where these no-code, low-code tools are so great. Like Ryan brought up Glide. We have an internal project called AppFit we've been working on. I spent like a year just in Glide playing with that myself. And that way I didn't burn out my designers asking them, hey, go build this, or burn out the engineers, hey, start to like think about this. I struggled with that and fought with that and slung clay with that, for a year on my own before I then could say, okay, I think, and I put it in front of people and got feedback. I put it in front of some of our clients to get feedback on it. And I was able to self-contain kind of that, okay, people not falling in love with it. It gave me a place to kind of, it's almost like Legos. I could build something, break it apart, build something else, break it apart. And there was very little switching cost for that. Until I found something that was down a path of like, yeah, that's an actual problem that you're trying to solve. And there's actually a business behind it.
Throwing in here, how do you think about the difference between, folks building out like Figma mocks versus low code, no code, actual some moving parts? Like, where's the split? Where, when should one consider
Figma is fantastic. Figma is beautiful, and it kind of depends. Part of what I love about Glide, it's literally like a Lego. It's like, here's a brick, that's all you get. Like, they have one way of doing charts, they have one way of doing forms, but you know what? You're not arguing then about design. And I think that's my only concern about Figma, is it can introduce another place to get hung up and to get perfect on, is let's get a perfect design inside Figma. Sometimes it's better to just be like, let's just get something out in front of people and know it's ugly, but what we're really testing for, is it functional? Like, does it make sense? Is it coherent? Right? And then we use the phrase here a lot, you have to earn the right. You were talking about some of the stuff around, like, you need to earn the right to deal with scale. You need to earn the right to make pixel perfect designs. And I think there's something about, like, it depends, again, what phase you are. But the closer you are to like just the idea phase, something like Glide is great because it just limits what you're going to argue about or overthink in your own head. You can just be like, okay, I just really want to validate that this is actually, like, the concept is good. I don't need to like figure out if it's pixel perfect yet. But if you are at a place, and again, founders have different talents and abilities. If you are a founder who does have an eye for design and you're comfortable, using something like Figma to express yourself, great. But again, don't fall in love with it, because someone may come and say, I hate it, and then you've got to like get through the emotional carnage of hearing that kind of information and be, humble and say like, okay, you're right, I'm wrong. I actually need to go and change what I've built.
Got it. Yeah. So rounding out the warnings and cautionary tales, Ryan, maybe you could share with us, one of these with respect to actual technical implementation and choices there that you know, stay away. If don't go down this dark path because only trouble follows.
I mean, we talked about it, like pre-scaling is the biggest thing.
Okay.
You're always going to run into these issues where you are trying to scale for like, oh, like what happens when we have 1 million people, but you literally don't have anybody yet in your business. Like, so like why? You need one user. And so you know, I think I've as a developer, I've run into that. I start asking questions like, hey, what to like product people or designers or business stakeholders, and I'm like, well, what about this situation? What about that situation? And I've been the, I don't know, the impetus of like creating that pre-scale mindset, and I've had to learn to fight that urge a lot and keep my mouth shut and not be excited about like the problem itself, but see like what is the business need right now. The business needs a very manual solution that doesn't need to be solved by software. That would prove the business that there's value here, maybe this feature, this idea. And being a person that can like in a way be humble and say like, yeah, you don't need me as a developer, you need somebody to go knock on doors right now and find out if this idea is a good one or not. So pre-scaling comes in like all shapes and sizes, but in software it's really often around like your server size, and I always am fighting like how manual can we get with this? How little software can we actually build? Because software becomes a liability, like maintenance costs and stuff like that.
And I heard, Neil, you said something about how you know, where you meet with these companies is usually at like Series A and Series B. And so you're having to unwind some of these kind of experiments. I would say congratulations to making it to Series A, because there's a number of like, just even to getting to that point, much less to Series B, like there are so few companies that even make it to that stage that have gotten traction, have, you know, product market fit. Like, you know, that's, I think it's, don't be afraid to incur some technical debt along the way. Just make sure you document it and say, I understand the trade-off. I understand what we're doing. But to Ryan's point, this is what the business needs right now. You know, we'll fix that. We'll earn the right to fix that later.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think part of the reason that you raise your Series A is I mean, before that point, you don't have cash. You're trying to make things happen with limited resources, right? And so you can like consciously and intelligently accrue technical debt for the purpose of getting to that next stage, you know? Like, of course, there is a cost to that, right? But that cost may be better deferred than incurred right now. And so I totally agree with that.
Well, that's all. That's great. I mean, this reinforces all the things I've seen throughout a career as well. So, and we see these in this conversation alone, common themes recur how many times, right? The pre-scale, all these things. So hopefully these are lessons that folks here can take away and absorb and put into practice as they go chase their own endeavors. Let's switch over to land this plane. Let's go switch over to questions from the audience. And by the way, I'd encourage folks that if you have other questions, let's get them in now because soon we'll all disappear. First question here. How do you share and validate your idea without the worry that someone else with the resources will take your idea? I get this one a lot.
I mean, I'm happy.
Please jump in. Yeah.
Yeah. The first thing I just have to say is the idea is just not the hard part. And I know that's hard because, you know, it's like, I've thought of this, no one else has thought of this. It's not about the idea, it's really around the execution. And so you just kind of need to get over the thought that someone else is going to kind of take your idea, because what it really comes down to is, are you the right person to execute that idea? And I think this almost goes into a little bit of the next one of like, part of the thing about just because, you know, being an idea, one of the things that when we talk to founders, we kind of test for, do you understand what you're signing up for when you really want to do this? Like, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. This is something that's going to consume a large part of your life, you know? And so you have to be okay with the fact that like you are the person that are actually built to bring your idea to life. And so it's, it's okay if, you got to go and get that validation from other people about that idea and not be afraid that like, oh, someone might see that and take it. I think if you are the right person with the right kind of mindset and the right perseverance to actually do it, it'll work out in the end for you. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I just to echo that, I think that like I totally agree with that. And the other part of that is that if you do well, even in the first stage of your business, it will be some form of public. And when it is some form of public, at that point, people will know about it anyway. And so it's very rare. There are very few ideas that I think the benefit of kind of like being in stealth mode
Yeah.
outweigh the consequences of being in stealth mode, like when you're in stealth mode, you can't talk to people about it. You restrict your opportunity, you lower your surface area of luck. And that may be worth it in very, very specific fields, but almost all entrepreneurs that we encounter are not in those fields. So I love that idea of the two-step strategy. Like at some point, Google will look at this field if it's as big as you say, and they will try and do what you're doing, right? And so if you're going to prepare for that then, how do you prepare for that now? And it's probably not by being quiet about it, it's probably
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
advantage.
The other thing is that it's also another way of validating your idea, right? Like if someone else looks at your idea and maybe there are other people that are already doing it, like don't be afraid. Like that, that's okay. That just means that that idea has been validated. But what you do need to do is figure out why are you going to be different from the other solutions that are out there. I don't think it's, multiple people trying to solve the same kind of idea. I think that's kind of assumed. It's you understanding why are we going to be different? I think that's the piece where you need to focus your energy.
Got
Absolutely.
it. Yeah. One thing I get, from the investor's perspective is folks will come up and they'll say, I want to be involved and talk with you, but I need you to sign an NDA. And I think a lot of people in that position don't understand that investors will never sign an NDA. And the reason for that is because we can never deconflict the literally thousands of pitches and things we hear from everyone. And I'll close that by saying reputable investors have a reputation to protect and uphold. So they're going to be very careful about respecting, that privacy, that sharing, intellectual property, whatever it may be. So that's something else to throw out there. Let's get one more. I'm going to throw the resources up here so people can look at this while we go. Let's get through one more question here because we're going to come up at time soon. The question goes, as an entrepreneur with the idea, but no technical skill, how do you find someone to help develop your idea? No funding yet, skeptical to get investment to get the developer.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to a question about yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Like we oftentimes assign homework to the founders we talk. Like, look, anybody could just go hire somebody to go build something for them, right? Like that's not the hard part again. The hard part is, okay, are you willing to roll up your sleeves? Are you willing to go sign up for a Glide account and start playing with something? Are you willing to get a little outside your comfort zone, start playing with these tools yourself before you bring someone in and start paying for that? We definitely will give people homework of things we want them to go try out. Maybe it's, depends on how when you say non-technical, there's all forms of non-technical, but like stand up something in Webflow, go build a website, go build a landing page, go post about it on LinkedIn. If you're not willing to even do something like that, then like I said, being a founder is exhausting. Like there's a good chance that you don't have that, then you're not going to be able to kind of make it for the entire journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it's funny we put this hard line between technical and non-technical founders, but like there is non-blank for all the different parts of your business, like non-accounting founder, non-sales founder, non-marketing founder, non-like fundraising founder. And for all of those, if you want to be in this for the long haul, Matt, to your point, right, you do have to teach yourself enough to be able to find the resources and find the people and be able to manage them well from your right now. And so much of being an entrepreneur is making do with limited resources. And this is one of many times you'll have to do that. And so this can't be the only hurdle that you have to overcome, right? And so like the answer, this is the hardest part, I think, of a lot of early stage startups is figuring out a way to kind of like scrappily get the things that you don't have for yourself. But if you become good at that, it's a huge indicator of success for your business. And so it's definitely worth investing in and thinking through and building frameworks for yourself around, I think.
Yeah. I mean, as a founder, you have to wear lots of hats, and some you like to wear, but there are a lot that I hate to put on, and I still have to put them on because, at the end of the day, it's your company and you're the one driving it forward. and you have to be okay with that.
The janitor is one of the roles. That's the way I say it,
I
right?
just did the dishes in our office, so
And
that's
if you can,
not- very
if you
true.
can cope and live with that, then you're probably have the right DNA to do this. Here's an interesting question that popped up. We'll wrap up with this last question here because then we're actually going to be over time. And the question goes like this: if I turn to an external developer team to develop a prototype, who will have ownership of the code? This is interesting, huh? Will issues arise if I transition to a new development team as I scale my business? So we've all seen this before. So
this is a very common thing.
yeah.
I would obviously this is governed by the contract that you put in place with the development team, and I think this is something to look at. So in terms of like what could happen, it's definitely case by case. I will say it's a huge red flag if a development team tries to keep proprietary ownership of the code.
Yeah.
Obviously, I run a development shop. Matt, you run a development shop. There are cases where you want to like you're reluctant to turn things over to an entrepreneur in case of lack of payment and all that stuff, right? Some of those things can come up, but the IP ownership of your code should always live in with the entrepreneur because, like again, at the end of the day, it's your code and your business, and it's the thing you're trying to create. I do think that it's a super common thing that we deal with. Early stage startups. Going back to the last question, they do kind of scrappily find their way through multiple phases of development. And so oftentimes there are multiple developers or multiple development teams. I do think that those transitions can be messy if you don't kind of set the groundwork up at the very beginning. This is a case where I think having a really good technical advisor, you don't need to hire someone to do this or whatever, but just having someone who's been through this process once or twice before, who can just very quickly kind of say, okay, here's a very light sort of, series of pieces of advice or whatever that'll help you kind of best manage this development team can be very helpful. This is a landmine. I think it's something that trips up a lot of entrepreneurs, and so I think Dennis, you're smart to be asking this question now, right? The more you can kind of prepare for this well, I think the better you'll be as you eventually switch to an in-house team.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, that's oftentimes what we try to do here at Uptech Studios. If they don't have an in-house team yet, as we get to that kind of another success metric or unlock investment, we will often just tell the people we're working with, like, we'll even help them hire their own kind of in-house team and have them work alongside our team. So there is kind of that, Raiders of the Lost Ark, nice transition going on from our team over to their team, because it is definitely a red flag for people who don't do that or are kind of opaque about that. And that's the way that we kind of try and solve that problem.
Excellent. What we should do here, I think, is wind this down because we're getting at time. I'd like to thank Neil, Matt, Ryan for your time here. You've dropped a lot of knowledge on us. Hopefully the folks in the audience got some good nuggets out of it. On the screen here, you should see contact information. You should feel free to reach out to any or all folks here for any follow-up questions that you'd like to have. I'm sure everyone is more than happy to spend a moment to follow up with any particular topics or questions of interest. I guess I'll just leave it at closing thoughts. Matt, do you have anything that you'd like to leave the room with the audience? A parting thought.
No, I think Neil said it well when he said this is kind of the hardest stage. It does feel like sometimes like you're going to be kind of wandering in the wilderness in this phase. I just want to reassure everybody that's very normal. That's very natural. This is not something that you're going to zip through. You are going to kind of struggle along the way, and I think that's a bit of the point. People ask me all the time, why do people get back in? I think it's honestly they miss this piece, this part of this is the kind of the hardest, but it's also the most rewarding kind of part of the journey. So you see, you've got my information up here. You've got a way to reach us at Uptech Studio. Please reach out. We've been through it ourselves. We've been through it with the people we work with. And definitely like I think you mentioned getting a tech advisor. That is a great idea, Neil. Like someone that's been through it before to like tell you what's normal and what's not.
You'd be surprised buying a coffee or lunch with the right person, will get you a lot of traction there. Neil, any parting thoughts you have on what we talked about today?
No, I mean, I agree. I think the two things that really stood out to me, Matt, I really loved your phrase, like success acceptance criteria, and sort of thinking about that, not just in terms of like, test cases or whatever, but thinking about that in terms of your business as well. Like what would make your business successful? What would make this phase of your business successful? What would make this round successful? I think that's a really good thing to think about. And then that mentorship aspect of it, I think, is really real. The Venn diagram between senior software developer and people who have built and scaled a business through multiple rounds of financing is relatively small, right? And like it is getting bigger every single year or whatever, right? But that group of people, I find often people who are looking for a tech advisor find a developer, but they don't necessarily have the growth kind of, skill set, or they find a, a non-developer sort of like, like growth person, but they don't necessarily have the sort of engineering and technical hat to be able to wear. But when you find that person, you don't need that person full-time on your team. You need their advice and guidance to be able to get through certain stages. And I think finding that person as a board member or an advisor or a supporter is great. And I think all of the people on this call, I think, fall at least somewhat into that category. And so, if we can be helpful, we obviously would love to help as well. I think it is a great joy to be able to like help people navigate their way through that and do that successfully, because again, that's not the reason you started your business. It wasn't to like bang your head against a code base. It was to build the thing that you're trying to build. And so getting people back into that headspace, I think, is a really fun thing to do.
Got it. Well said. I don't think we could end on any better note here. Thank you all for panelists for helping us here think through this. Attendees, thank you for spending a chunk of your day with us. Hopefully you got something good out of this. And again, please reach out to any of the folks here if you have any follow-up questions or whatnot. I guess we'll call it here. Thanks again, and stay tuned for another webinar. You'll get that through our normal channels, our newsletter, at logicboostlabs.com. You can sign up there. We'll also post these on LinkedIn as well, as we have future webinars on different topics. Everyone have a great day.